Thought maybe you boys might be interested in putting on a big-time wrestling bout. You know, make a nice hunk of dough for yourself.
It's time to play roller ball!
Santa?
Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus.
Morgan, you're out of here. You don't have the right temperament for the trade.
You're a dead man. What am I supposed to do?
There's always barber college.
Frankie, I know you're a great wrestler, but my brother, who ain't as handsome as you, is as strong as Charles Atlas.
Yeah, but I've wrestled women that are bigger than him.
Sure, you got fat, sloppy women.
Hello and welcome to Camel Clutch Cinema, the podcast where we talk about movies that star wrestlers or have wrestling in them. I'm Guy Hutchinson.
And I'm Craig Cohen. On this episode, we are talking about Mighty Joe Young. And as always, be forewarned, this discussion will be chock full of spoilers. And is it safe to say that we could possibly spoil any Giant Ape movie?
I don't know. I bet there's a lot of people haven't seen this movie or have seen this movie and seen the 1999, I think, remake, and their memory is more of that film.
Yeah.
You've seen this movie. I know we saw this movie together.
Yeah, you know what? I think this was the first time I watched it since that time we got together and watched it. So it's been a couple years for me.
I think when we watched this last, now we're talking when the DVD came out.
Yeah.
But I think we watched this way many years ago on VHS cassette.
Oh, yeah, you know what? I think you're right. Yeah, so this would I probably watched it when I got the DVD, which I think was back in 2006. Mm-hmm. So it had been sitting on my shelf waiting for another go-through. Right.
Very exciting to talk about this. I know we'll get into this later, but this is one of your father's favorite movies.
Yeah, you know what? I did not know this until I told him we were doing this episode, and he told me it was his favorite movie of all time, and he gave me some tidbits and did some of the research I would have done, and he actually sent in an email that we'll read at the end.
All right, great. So, yeah, this is an exciting movie. There is a scene in this movie, which we'll get to, that has a bunch of wrestlers in it. But it's an exciting movie. It's a similar style movie to King Kong, which I think a lot of people, talk about it and compare it to. And like King Kong, which got a remake in about 2005, this got a remake at the end of the 90s, right around the time that Godzilla was being produced by Roland and Emmerich or Dean Devlin.
Dean Devlin, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, with this movie, I was really hoping they would put like a warning at the beginning of the movie saying, "Don't worry, everything turns out okay." I was worried sick for Joe.
Yeah, you really do worry about him, and with the president of King Kong biting the dust at the end of that movie.
Yeah.
King Kong falls off the Empire State Building. Spoiler, which I'm sorry, we didn't warn that we were going to spoil that. But, yeah, you get the thump, 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 and then it stops.
Yeah.
And he's gone. He leaves. And Joe, we get a much happier ending. Craig, why don't you give us a plot summary?
All right. A slick nightclub owner, King Kong veteran Robert Armstrong, discovers the giant ape frolicking in Africa as the beloved pet of a young girl, Terry Moore. He brings both to Hollywood as a floor show sensation until some no-goods ply Joe with booze and the blitzed behemoth goes bonkers. Highlights such as Armstrong's henchmen trying to lasso Joe cowpoke style, Joe playing tug-of-war with muscle men, and plenty of Joe to the rescue action make Mighty Joe Young mighty fine entertainment.
Oh, my God, this is the greatest description I've ever heard of any movie.
Yes.
No goods, ply Joe with booze, and the blitz behemoth goes bonkers. Oh, I love it. The director of this, what was he known for? What has he done?
He was actually Ernest B. Schoedsack, and he was director of the original King Kong. The sequel that probably a lot of people don't know about, Son of Kong, which came out, I think, later that year or the year after King Kong. Mm-hmm. And, he went on to direct a lot of pictures in the 30s and 40s.
And the writer of this was also involved in King Kong and Son of Kong. So this was really something that was spun off from that film.
Yeah, they were getting the band back together.
And this came out in the summer of 1949.
Yes. So quite a few years after.
27th.
Yeah, quite a few years after Kong.
Yeah, so this, one thing that I had always noticed about this is King Kong doesn't look as good as Joe looks. Joe looks better. They had perfected and figured out a lot of the articulation with the ape.
Oh yeah, and another thing is Joe's look was more consistent in King Kong, and don't get me wrong, King Kong is an incredible achievement and it's a great movie, but Kong looks different at different points of that movie. They used a model at one point, they used a big hand and a big head. So there's points in that movie where if you didn't know, you'd think there were multiple apes running around.
Right. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Let's talk about the cast on this. Terry Moore, a beautiful, beautiful actress. She's still around.
Oh wow, I didn't check that.
84 now. A few years ago, she did a commentary track on a DVD for The Great Rupert, and I said, "Oh my God, Terry Moore!" And she sounded great, and I obviously couldn't see her, but she sounded great and was very excited and loved talking about her career. She posed nude for Playboy in 1984.
Oh wow.
She was 55 years old.
Good for her.
And of course, she famously, in addition to having a storied, career, tons of films under her belt, famously lived with Howard Hughes. And she claimed that they were secretly married in 1949.
Oh, wow.
So the year that this movie came out is when she claimed she secretly married Howard Hughes. And so she felt she had a claim to his fortune since there was the whole thing where they couldn't find his will.
Yeah, get in line.
And she plays Jill Young. She's gorgeous in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
What about Ben Johnson as Greg? What do you think of his performance?
At that time, the acting was different. It was great. It was, slightly over the top. He played a cowboy from Oklahoma, Boomer Sooner, as opposed to Texas. And he was great because he was sort of the through line in the movie of the guy that really didn't think that moving Joe out of Africa was a good idea from the get-go.
Yeah. Ben Johnson, actually born in Oklahoma, 1918.
Okay.
And he was a Western star in many, many films. He's in the Pro Rodeo Cowboys Association Pro Rodeo Hall of Fame. And so this is a guy, when he's doing that lasso stuff in the movie, that's him. And some of it is, certainly not mind blowing, but it's technically sound. And for an actor to be able to do that is unusual. And that's why this guy was an accomplished cowboy, in rodeos, and as well as being a stuntman, rancher, and actor.
Yeah, I think anytime you can get a rope over your head and swing it and have it do anything, I don't know, that's an achievement because I've tried and it's hard.
Yes, I was just going to say, I have tried this every time I get a rope in my hands.
Yeah, and then it's like...
I even get an extension cord sometimes, and I'll be like, let me see, and you can't do it.
No.
Robert Armstrong, he was big time in King Kong playing Carl Denham, and then returns for this film.
Yeah, so the reunion continues.
Yeah, very, very great cast. And I think everyone in this movie is well cast. There is this hint of comedy to a lot of it. There's, some very powerful acting in some scenes. There's people that look the part. For God's sakes, Terry Moore, is convincing in the thought that she could have possibly grown up in the jungle and been this, this beautiful, naive young lady.
Oh, yeah.
I read that Fay Wray, her scream is in this film.
Okay.
Yeah, apparently she didn't have anything to do with it, but they had on tape somewhere a scream of her. And when they needed a woman to scream, probably in one of the nightclub scenes, they used Fay Wray. So apparently, if you know where to look for it, and I don't, Fay Wray, you can hear her in there screaming.
Yeah, I'm sure it's not as distinctive as like the Willem scream. So
no, but I bet there's somebody that's a big fan of both that one day was like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Rewound it, and then went over, got his other VHS, put that in, checked it out. He was like, that's it. That's the same one.
Yeah. Those discoveries are great too.
Oh, it really is. All right, let's get right into the movie, and then we'll talk about the wrestling scene and everything that comes up as it comes along. It's got a very interesting opening. It says, starring Mr. Joseph Young as himself.
Yeah, and what's really great about this? I mean, we get the whole sequence where Jill, as a young girl, finds the two African men with the baby in the basket, and she buys him off of them. And at that point, it's a real baby ape, I guess, a
Yeah.
chimp, or no, an ape.
Right.
So at that point, I mean, having seen this movie before, I was still in anticipation of seeing the real grown-up Joseph Young when he appeared.
Yeah, you can't wait to see him, and they make you wait a bit for it.
Yeah.
So we get this African scene. I guess audiences are supposed to, going into this, if they don't know what the movie's about, they're thinking there's a child in the basket.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I don't know, but it's, you know, they bring over this basket and it's shaking and there's something in it. She thinks it's adorable. We don't find out until partway through the scene that it's a gorilla, and she buys it. She gets jewelry. She gets her dad's flashlight and some coins. She gives it to the African gentleman. These are like some kind of hunters or something that have poached this gorilla, and we immediately understand that she knows that no good will come of this gorilla if she doesn't buy it. If she doesn't buy it, it's being eaten or something.
Yeah, movie over basically.
Yeah, exactly. So she goes to buy it. She gives them a Jack in the Box. I love this part.
Yes.
She gives them a Jack in the Box. It cranks. It plays the music. It pops out. It scares the hell out of them.
Oh yeah.
I mean, these guys sell. This is Vince McMahon, finding out a swerve, and just putting his hands up and going, no. These guys sell scared in a very wonderfully over the top way.
Yes.
So she names him. She says, Joe, I'll call him Joe. And her dad comes home and finds a baby gorilla in his bed. He's not happy. He says he's going to be a huge, fierce, dangerous gorilla one day.
Yeah, and we get a really cool joke here because he says we can't keep him, and then they cut to Joe in his little carriage drinking milk, and it's established that they did keep him. So I thought that was a really cool little sort of comedy beat there.
Exactly. So we're told he's going to be huge and fierce. And so anybody that has come to see this movie and doesn't know what Mighty Joe Young is, and maybe thought maybe that was one of the wrestlers we were going to see later, we get 12 years later, we're in New York, and we're waiting to see this giant, huge, angry, fierce gorilla.
Yeah.
Max O'Hara is building a new nightclub. This guy he's a mover and a shaker.
Yeah, very much like Carl Denham.
You know who he reminded me of a lot, though? He reminded me of Peter Parker's boss.
Yes. You know what? In that opening, the first time we see him and he's at his desk, he definitely had that J. Jonah Jameson type delivery.
I really felt that. Now, take this away. What's this? It's terrible. What's this? I really felt he had that, that style down pat. And he works because he's in a sense the bad guy of the picture at points. And then eventually there are moments we're supposed to root for him. He's certainly not a villain we want destroyed. And there's a twist later on in the movie with him, or at least a change of heart. And so you gotta like this guy, even though he's a jerk.
Yeah.
And they do it well. So we start seeing everybody. He's looking for something. He's going to go to Africa and get something for this new nightclub. And then this rodeo star, Greg Johnson, comes in and says he could go with him to lasso lions.
Yeah, I guess the rodeo business had gotten cold at that point, and he was looking for other uses for his skill set.
So I wonder exactly what Max expected to get in the jungle. I guess he thought he'd get some lions.
Yeah.
And I guess he thought he'd lie. He'd make up stories.
Yeah, because even, when you look at the nightclub, which we'll get to later, it seemed like the nightclub was built for just a ton of lions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When we get to the nightclub, there's giant glass windows. It's almost like an aquarium for lions.
Yeah.
So he's out there and he's just sitting around just talking, he's chit-chatting. He's saying, hey, I was attacked by pygmies today. And they're like, really? Because everybody there is in on the gag that he's making stories up. And, he tells all these crazy stories. And then they hear this roar and everybody's running. Everybody gets up. Everybody that's there knows something big is coming. And then we see Joe by the lion cage, and this is a wonderful reveal of Mighty Joe Young.
Yeah, this was the moment where I heard the roars and I said, oh man, I can't wait to see Joe. And I had seen him before.
Right.
I mean, they were really, this was really, really top-notch filmmaking in terms of building, anticipation.
Yeah, it works every time I watch this movie. It is a real well-made movie. So he's trying to get the lion out of the cage, and I think he wants to free the lion, but the lion gets scared and bites him. And so then Joe breaks the cart, and then he falls down.
Yes.
He clumsily falls down, and this is, at this point, we're looking at a stop-motion, maquette of an ape that they're through stop motion photography or moving. So this is a choice that they made. This isn't a guy in costume that tripped.
Yeah.
They went to great trouble to have him be a little clumsy here.
Yeah, it almost seemed like they took some of the fun stuff that we saw in King Kong and ramped it up a little bit and made it a little bit more comical. And it really works for Joe because it's a character trait.
Yeah, he falls down. They chase the lion, and Max and his guys, they run after the ape. They're thinking, hey, is there a way we can bring this back in some form? And I think they would even be happy to bring back a dead ape at this point.
Yes, and what's funny here is, so I guess Greg and some other guys go to lasso him up, and somebody keeps saying you can't lasso an ape, and I was thinking to myself, well, why not?
Yeah, are you sure? Has this been tried?
Yeah.
Yeah, they show Joe next to what's clearly stock footage, but you got to give them a pass. This was 1949, but stock footage of elephants, and he's bigger than an elephant, and it's a great scene because he's kind of on his all fours. He's slouched down, and we see that he's physically as larger than an elephant. And so they try to rope him. He climbs up on top of a mountain. He grabs Max, and he's about to kill Max.
Yes.
And then we see the grown-up Jill. It's Terry Moore. She comes out. She's like, Joe, drop him. And Joe listens to her. Joe is her friend. And this is such a great payoff to her buying this little baby gorilla. Dad was wrong. The baby gorilla's going to protect you.
Yes. Better than any mace.
Yeah, I think this is this character, this concept is as old as the hills. I think it's in Hamlet. I'm not sure, but I know it's in The Lion King. You've got Timon and Pumbaa. They find this lion as a baby, and they say, "We'll raise it, and it'll be on our side." This is a very old concept, and it works for her. She raises this fierce gorilla, and then this gorilla is listening to this little, to this woman, but she's a full-size woman, but she's very, very small to the gorilla, and he listens to her. He drops him, and then they go over to talk to her. Greg comes to her house, and we find out that Dad's gone.
Yeah.
And we see Max hiding in the bushes because he's too afraid to come near her.
Yeah. He knows that she's got a bodyguard.
So he comes over with his contract, and he offers it to her. He's still very sleazy at this point.
Yeah.
And she takes it pretty quickly.
Yeah, it almost seems like she doesn't even take any time to think about it.
Yeah, it is very strange. So we then cut to the nightclub, which is amazing. It is absolutely gorgeous. It's called Max O'Hara's Golden Safari, starring Mr. Joseph Young of Africa, which is certainly a payoff to the title card at the beginning. And I really loved the set design here.
Oh, yeah. It seemed like when I saw this club, it almost seems like you didn't need the attraction of Mr. Joseph Young to get me to go there.
I don't know. This place looked so big. I don't know how it could ever survive. It was like the Rainforest Cafe. It looked a lot like that. It looked like the Enchanted Tiki Room at Walt Disney World. It looked like Casa Bonita in Denver, Colorado, where they have cliff divers and giant trees. But this place was so big, it was like Madison Square Garden in there. I mean, it looked like they packed in thousands of people.
Yeah.
So everybody's sitting around at the club, and there's some comedy here where we get people talking about the Lions, and who's this Joseph Young? I hope this is, and they're going back and forth. There's a lot of, funny dialogue here, and then we see the press, and they're, we got to know, you got to tell us who Joseph Young is.
Yeah, I loved this. It was like almost they sort of panned down the bar and would stop at each couple, and they would get their comments in. And this is where we learn that there's, reinforced glass to keep the lions behind the glass, and nobody knows who this Joseph Young is.
The nightclub act is great the way they started off. He introduces Terry, says she's a friend of Joseph Young. She sits down and plays Beautiful Dreamer on the piano. And people start getting really irritated. The crowd starts to turn.
I would.
And then the stage rises up to reveal Mr. Joseph Young of Africa holding the piano over his head. He's holding the floor she was on. And people are terrified.
Yeah. And then he starts rotating like he's on like a mechanical Lazy Susan or something.
Yeah, it must have been one heck of a powerful Lazy Susan because he's gigantic. I want to talk a little bit about Beautiful Dreamer. I went and looked this song up to find out more about it. Obviously, everybody's heard this song before. It's a very familiar melody. But I found out it was written by Stephen Foster, who lived from 1826 to 1864, published after his death in March of 1864. And they said that the first edition of this declared that it was the last song he ever wrote.
Wow. And
it was composed a few days prior to his death. However, the copyright date on the first edition is 1862, which means he copyrighted it prior to his death by 2 years. And there are apparently 20 different songs that claim to be his last song, and no one knows which one is his last song.
Oh, man, can you imagine if he had lived in this, sort of in this century? We'd be getting music from him sort of like Tupac, for years and years and years after his death.
Yeah, it is a very beautiful song. I'm sure people can remember. It's Beautiful Dreamer, Wake Unto Me. It's, it's been used for comic effect in a lot of things. And if you watch some older movies, occasionally it'll be on, and it's sometimes used as a lullaby. It's apparently a lover serenading the beautiful dreamer in the song, who's oblivious to the world, and according to some scholars that have researched this, is probably dead. The song is probably written by someone to their dead lover, because a lot of Foster's work apparently would have dead young women in it.
Creepy, that was
right?
his thing. Yeah.
Now, in the remake that they made, they didn't use Beautiful Dreamer at all, but they found an equally, I think, original and beautiful African song. Which plays throughout the whole movie, which is really, really nice. They've got wonderful singers, and I don't know the actual words, but it sounds like Yimba Wimbo, and it's just really great. And they play that just like in this movie, where you constantly hear Beautiful Dreamer, in instrumental form throughout the whole movie, and they'll play it faster and slower depending on what the scene is. The new one does the same thing, but with a totally different song, and with an African song, which I guess would make more sense.
Yeah.
That she would know it when she comes there to play.
Mm-hmm.
We get to the tug of war scene, Craig.
Yes.
This is a great scene. This really, really makes you, if you're watching a movie like we are, looking for wrestling action, this is a real big wrestling payoff.
Oh yeah, I mean, you've got 10 guys in a row that all for the most part had some involvement in pro wrestling, either before or after this movie.
So let's run through them one at a time. The first guy we see, he introduces him as Sammy Stein, and he breaks a chain. Each one of them has a strongman thing. And so he breaks a chain and stands there, looks really menacing, as they all do. And I found an article from 1941, February 17th, out of the Reading Eagle, and it said, new wrestling promoter for Reading brings Sammy Stein. I mean, this guy was big enough, sports page, a big headline just for him. Special 1-hour match added to Thursday's card. Sammy Stein, one of the greatest flying tackle experts in the game, who left the New York Giants professional football team to invade the grappling game, has signed on to meet Billy Whooper Watson, former light heavyweight champion of England. The Stein-Watson match is carded as a special attraction. Stein, one of the few Jewish grapplers to gain recognition as a standout grappler, has been grappling in sensational style as of late, and he's considered a leading contender for the World's Championship. This is interesting Mostly because they use the word grapple so much.
Yes. Next, we have Killer Carl Davis, and he bends a metal bar.
Hey, that's a great feat for anybody.
Yes.
So tell me about this San Jose News article.
All right. So it's got the headline of Unusual Mat Card Here Next Week. So it's a promo for an upcoming match, and it says it'll be Jumping Joe Savoldi versus Carl Killer Davis in the main event on next Wednesday night Civic Auditorium wrestling card. Davis first insisted that the match be one fall to a finish with the entire burst going to the winner, but Savoldi would not accept such terms. As a result, the match will be over the regulation 1 hour route, 2 out of 3 falls deciding. And I love that. It's like an Iron Man match.
It really sounds exciting. It also sounds like for whatever reason, Davis had no pull here. He's like, hey, this is how I want it. And he insisted, it says, he insisted that it be a one fall to the finish match. Savoldi's like, no. And then he's like, all right, well, I guess we'll do it your way.
Maybe he was playing the heel and he had to do the, I'm just going to get my one fall and take the money and run.
Yeah. The next guy we see is Rasputin, the Mad Russian. That's how they bill him in the movie. And he's got handcuffs on and he just pops them right off.
Yeah.
And I found an article 1935. So we're talking quite a deal before this movie came out, from the Telegraph Herald. Ivan Rasputin to wrestle the Bat.
Well, okay, that's a great headline. I'm reading.
Ivan Rasputin, Russian Cossack, will make his debut in, and this is, I'm not exactly sure how this is pronounced, but I think it's Dubois, when he meets the Bat in the semi-final bout of Ken Fenelton's wrestling card, featuring the world champion Midget Fisher and Gio Doucette at the Athletic Field on Friday night, September 20th. Now, here's what I like. Rasputin wears a full beard and has a body covered in hair, although he doesn't depend on his appearance to put him over. Ivan is one of the strongest wrestlers in the game today, which was proven when he wrestled Gio Doucette to a 90-minute draw in Chicago 2 weeks ago. Rasputin is in demand all over the country, having wrestled in larger cities from coast to coast, and he meets a very tough, clever wrestler in the Bat. The Bat has appeared here several times and has given a very good account of himself. The fans have all had their guess as to who this masked marvel is, and will welcome the man that will come down and force him to unmask. So it sounds like the Bat was the heel here, and everybody wanted to see Ivan Rasputin come and pull that mask off.
Yeah, and they fought to a 90-minute draw in a previous match. Or
Can you imagine that?
I know. We talked about this on the No Holds Barred, not the Hulk Hogan No Holds Barred episode, the other No Holds Barred we did with the Bowery Boys, about how so much wrestling from this time period is just lost. And I mean, we're reading about some amazing stuff here. I mean, a 90-minute match, that's a half hour, shorter than SmackDown is each week.
Yes. It really, just two guys going toe to toe really must have been something. Ivan Rasputin. So a lot of these guys, it's interesting. There's really not a lot of information on them today. The best way to find information is to go through news archives and look for old articles like this. But the next guy that we see in this, you actually don't have to look very far. There's a lot of information on him. He was in No Holds Barred. It was the guy who played the trainer in that movie. It's Bomber Kulke. Mm-hmm. And when they introduce him, he's got a barbell and he flexes it.
Yeah, it's one of those big. It looks like something that that me or you would curl with two hands.
Yeah, if we were lucky.
Yeah.
It looks humongous and heavy, but it also looks like something out of Roger Rabbit. So it's very cartoonish. And out of all the feats of strength we've seen so far, this is the one that's the easiest to fake. You put two basketballs on and then you paint it black.
Yes.
Henry Kulke, born in 1911, died 1965. Very famous American actor. He was a former pro wrestler, and he was probably best remembered for his role as Chief Petty Officer Curly Jones from The Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, which was a television show, very popular. But he also appeared in dozens and dozens of films and television shows. This was a well-known actor and a guy I think we'll probably end up seeing more of. I wasn't surprised to see him again just because of the amount of work he's done. It was interesting to see him pop up again.
Yeah.
Who was next?
Slammin' Sammy Menaker And the crowd response he got was, "That's my boy." There's a lot of interesting crowd noise here.
That's weird. From this moment on, I think almost everybody gets a weird, crowd response where somebody just says something in the crowd. I don't know if when they were screening the movie, they're like, not enough's happening. Let's get a loud heckler in the background. Yeah. But it is weird. I love his feat of strength.
I remember this is a feat of strength that impressed you then. And I think, to this day, it still impresses, I know you and me and probably impresses a lot of people. He rips a phone book in half.
Yeah, this is something I don't think people will appreciate for much longer, though, because there aren't phone books anymore.
No.
Nobody has phone books. So, the art of ripping them in half is probably going to go away. I bet guys that can do it, and I once wanted to learn how, and I researched it and read about, because there is a trick to anything,
Mm-hmm.
But you have to be incredibly strong. You have to have very, very strong hands, and there's a trick and a technique to how you rip it in order to make it work. But I looked into it. It is very interesting. And guys that can do it, I bet they've stockpiled phone books. I bet they go into an office building. They're like, you got a phone book there? You're not going to use that, right? You mind if I take it? Because you got to have a room full of them so that for the rest of your life, you can keep ripping them up.
Yeah.
You only get one shot at ripping that up.
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
Tell me about Sammy Menaker.
He actually started out as a baseball player, and he played Class A ball for the New York Yankees as a catcher before turning to the mat. His name was Frank, and they changed it to Sam because promoters thought that Frank didn't sound Jewish enough.
Okay.
In 1941, his wrestling career was put on hold by the war.
Yeah, before you get any further, I think it's important to explain why that is, though. Back then, in the days and up through even like when Bruno Sammartino was around, you were known by your nationality because that's how they would put you over, especially in a city like New York. If you were Jewish, that was great because all the Jewish people are going to cheer for you. If you're Puerto Rican, all the Puerto Rican people are going to cheer for you. And here's the secret to that. Or if you're Italian, the Italians, etc. The secret to that is you'd also get all of those other groups cheering for you regardless. So if you were Jewish, you'd get all the Italians and the Puerto Ricans as well because you weren't the regular, ordinary, run-of-the-mill Caucasian hero. So, by being a member of one of those, those ethnic groups in New York or other big cities, you were accepted by all of them. And a great example of that was Tony, I'm blanking on his name. Not Garcia.
Gurria?
What is it? Thank you, Tony Gurria. I'm thinking Tony Garcia, which is his birth name.
Okay, yeah.
But Tony Gurria, who was from, he was from like New Zealand.
Yeah.
But he got over as being Italian with a Spanish name. It didn't matter because people just, if you were ethnic at that time period, you wanted someone ethnic to cheer for. And so that's why his name couldn't be Frank here, Craig.
Yeah. And really quick, a real quick Tony Gurria story. When I was a kid, my aunt and uncle used to take us into MSG for the wrestling because they had wrestling once a month at the Garden. So one month we're there for a card and we're, in the Garden outside, by the concession stands, and we look over and there's Tony Gurria in his wrestling gear on a payphone.
That is great. I one time was at an ECW show when Sandman was behind me waiting to use the phone, not the phone, the water fountain. And I was sitting there saying, oh, my God, Sandman's right behind me waiting to use the water fountain.
Wrestlers get thirsty, too.
So tell me a little bit more about Sammy Menaker.
All right. So in 1946, he was discharged from the Army after 5 years of service with the rank of Major. He returned to wrestling, but soon abandoned the tights and became a promoter and manager and later a commentator. Some of his proteges were his wife, June Byers, and gorgeous George Wagner.
Yeah, very famous.
Yeah, he was a licensed pilot and used to fly to many of their bookings.
This guy's amazing.
Yeah, and he's got some other movie appearances in addition to Mighty Joe Young, Abbott and Costello in the Foreign Legion, and Alias the Champ.
Which is the Gorgeous George film, and the Abbott and Costello movie also has a big wrestling theme throughout. So that's fantastic. He died in 1994 at the age of 79.
Mm-hmm.
Mac the Iron Man. This one gets a response from a woman going, "Oh, wow, what a man." as he bends a railroad spike. And it is at this point that you start to wonder what do they have left to prove? You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I keep waiting for one of them to just start digging a hole in the ground or something. But this guy appears to be the only one that was not a professional wrestler. I looked him up, and I did find lots of people online saying all of these guys are pro wrestlers, but I couldn't find a single bit of information that said he was a pro wrestler. I did find a Time magazine, actually True magazine article from the 1950s that mentioned him. It was called Strongman in the Barroom, Ian Big Mac Bachelor. That was his real name. Mac the Iron Man is a fantastic nickname, but he went by Big Mac mostly, and he tended bar in Hollywood when he wasn't performing strongman tricks, you know, like bending a railroad spike or any of the other things the guys do in this movie. Mm-hmm. He was an arm wrestler. He would arm wrestle anybody that came into the bar. And for 20 years, he never lost a single match, and he would also bend bottle caps with his fingers.
You know what? I did some additional research, and I found out his trick was he would go over the top like Stallone in Over the Top. So he got that little advantage with the, you know, you hook the thumb over.
That's right. Go over the top, Dad. I also found an arm wrestling article. Yes, there was one in Sports Illustrated, October 9th, 1978, which in the midst of a bigger article about arm wrestling said during 1940s and 50s, a bartender, the legendary Ian Mac Bachelor, began to focus a bit more attention on the sport until he retired in the 1960s at the age of approximately 60. Bachelor took on all comers night after night, year after year at his bar in Los Angeles, playing right hand or left hand, seated or standing, handshake or thumb block, sick or well, tired or fresh, drunk or sober, and straight the arm of every single man he met. So this legend, whether it's 100% true or not, this guy was a tough guy.
It's just amazing. I mean, to think of all those years going undefeated.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't matter what was going on. And they said he would drink like a keg of beer a day. So this guy was probably hammered half the times he did this.
And he also managed to maintain a great looking mustache.
He did. He had a beautiful handlebar mustache that you would never believe was real. This guy looked like Big Bully Busick. Do you remember him? He was a wrestler in WWE during the Doink the Clown era.
Okay.
And he came out for a short time, was managed by Harvey Whippleman, and had the curly mustache.
That's great.
So Wee Willie Davis is next. Tell me about Wee Willie Davis. What do they say when they show him?
Look, he's got fur, and he's not the first guy there to have fur, so
no.
I guess they just noticed that his was the most pronounced. And he bends a pipe, and he gives the pipe a look when he's done, like he's slightly disappointed with his bend. Like he didn't like the fact that he didn't get it exactly in the middle. There's sort of a look he gives it that really sort of cracked me up, and it made him stand out at least. We found a newspaper article related to Wee Willie Davis, and
just such a great name. This was not a wee man by any stretch of the imagination.
And the headline reads, it's from the San Jose News, September 4th, 1945. Sander Sabo in semi with Davis. Sander Sabo, the mighty Sabo, who is recognized as one of the 5 best wrestlers in the game today, will rate no higher than the semi wind-up spot on next Wednesday night's Auditorium Wrestling card. He's working in the main event this week, attracted a crowd of 2,200 people.
Which must have been a lot, or they wouldn't have put it in there.
Yes, but despite his ability and drawing power, the famed Hungarian rates no better than the 45-minute semi next week, and his opponent will be another well-known character in the person of Wee Willie Davis. And here we go again. It's a main event of 1 hour.
That's the undercard, but the main event we get Billy Hansen
and
with Vincent Lopez, the Mexican Idol who once held the world title.
Yes,
sounds fantastic.
Yeah, so it looks like you were getting these 1 hour matches. You know, what a great time.
Oh, it was. And then in the opening match, we got somebody named Babe Sharkey, the Texas Cyclone, who was hooking up with Pat Fraley, who was a former police sergeant from Boston.
See, and it's good to see they had that that gimmick even way back then, where sure it wasn't his day job anymore, but it was sort of like they were booking him as as the police guy.
Who knows? He may have never been to Boston. This was the part on this article I liked the best, though. Reserved seat tickets will go on sale Monday at the National Shirt Shop.
I love it. I wonder if it's still there in San Jose.
The next guy we see, Man Mountain Dean.
He bends a horseshoe.
Who bends a horseshoe, and I bet he was more famous than Man Mountain Rock. But I was so excited when they said his name, just because you got Man Mountain. I mean, I don't need much more.
Yeah.
Man Mountain Dean. 1953, we found his obituary. He died of a heart attack, and they named him his real name here, Frank S. Leavitt. And probably, once again, Frank just wasn't Jewish enough for the wrestling world.
Yeah.
So they had to change his name to Man Mountain Dean. But they said he was a huge, colorful, one-time wrestler known as Man Mountain Dean. He died at the Georgia country home of a heart attack at the age of 63. The bearded giant who pioneered the current vaudeville type of wrestling had not been ill, and his wife Doris was with him when he died. The Man Mountain came out of New York's Lower East Side to enjoy a long and never dull career as a football player, wrestler, soldier, bodyguard, sergeant-in-arms, movie actor, and finally a politician.
Wow.
He wrestled 6,783 matches in his heyday, commanding between 500 and 1,500 for each mat appearance. He was a longtime darling of Hollywood, where his thick beard was one of his gaudy trademarks in the showman style of wrestling. And he began wrestling in 1916. And it really, really sounds like he had one heck of a legacy. So Man Mountain Dean, fantastic in this, bending a horseshoe.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I mean, those rates for, considering he died in 1953, that prior to that wrestling, he was getting between 500 and 1,500 a match. I mean, that's pretty substantial for that time.
The next guy I've heard of. This guy, is a pretty big name. I've seen, old videos of him wrestling.
Yeah, the Swedish Angel, and he breaks the wood board over his head, or it's like
it's more than a board. Yeah, he gets a big like 2x4.
Yeah, it almost looks like a fence post maybe.
Yeah.
Like, and his real name was Phil Olofsson, and he suffered from the disease known as acromegaly.
Combined fish.
Yeah, it's the same as Andre the Giant.
So that's that disease that makes you big and also makes you, Andre had a relatively normal look, but if you looked, his head and features were bigger than they should have been. Swedish Angel really was out of proportion. A lot of his facial features were very almost grotesque.
Yeah. He made his he won his first title in December 1943. He defeated Orville Brown to win the MWA Kansas City World Heavyweight title.
Right, but then he lost it. He lost it a couple days later.
Yeah, December 9th, Orville Brown got it back, and then he later became a wrestling promoter and trainers of wrestlers such as Bill Melby, who I do not know.
Yeah.
And there would later be another Swedish Angel called the Super Swedish Angel, and he was played by actor Tor Johnson.
Right. So Tor Johnson, who famously is played by George the Animal Steele in the movie Ed Wood, went on to take this name and be kind of like Santino Marella taking Gorilla Monsoon's real name and using it. Gorilla Monsoon was Gino Marella, Robert Gino Marella. And so, it is interesting that the name continued on. Swedish Angel was very much a George the Animal Steele kind of wrestler.
Yeah. That's what, at least his look. Yeah, he definitely seemed like that would be his gimmick.
And then last, and certainly not least, the biggest name of the bunch, they bill him exactly like this: the former heavyweight champion of the world, Primo Carnera. And he flexes his biceps, and metal bands that are around his biceps snap off and fly away.
Now, I got to tell you, that out of all the wrestlers or all the strong men in that line, that was my favorite gimmick. Now, not counting the phone book, which one do you rank as your favorite?
Oh, okay. Not counting the phone book, which one do I rank as my favorite?
Because I thought the metal bands, that's that's pretty impressive.
It is. The weird thing is I backed it up just to hear whether they said wrestling champion or heavyweight champion.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I backed it up, I saw you could see how they were scored. You could see the where they popped off, how they had had a cut on them. The bands of whatever they were made out of were set to go, obviously, at that spot. I do like that. I think I might go with the horseshoe just because I've held a horseshoe.
Yes.
And bending one, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
I've played horseshoes before. That's got to be, you can't do that. I mean, these are all tricks that, that they should impress us far more than they do because people can't do these things,
Yes. The horseshoe would have been my second choice behind the metal bands popping off.
I mean, the thing about this is if they got up on stage and bench pressed a lot of weight or something, people that can do that. You say, I work with a guy who he works out all the time and he can bench press a lot. But these things, people don't do these things. These are crazy things to do. To take a board and snap it over your head, that's insane. So, it's like if they started eating glass at this point. It's just very crazy, So I do like this. The metal bands pop off. And I did some research on Primo Carnera, who I thought I knew a whole lot about, and I found a lot of information that I hadn't heard, which blew my mind. He was born in Italy, and he was a heavyweight champion in boxing. He was a tag team champion in wrestling. In 1933, he knocked down Ernie Schaff in 13 rounds in New York City, and then Ernie Schaff died 2 days later.
Oh, wow. And
so he became very notorious for that. For his next fight, he faced the world heavyweight champion Jack Sharkey. This was on June 29th, 1933 at MSG. And he became the world champ, knocking out Sharkey in round 6. Ooh. So a lot of people, though, say that the uppercut that he hit him with didn't land.
Oh, no.
It was a phantom punch. So 1933, he also played himself alongside Max Baer in The Prize Fighter and the Lady, which is a very famous movie. And then he lost the title to Max Baer, who's the father, by the way. He's a legendary boxer, but his son, Max Jr., was Jethro on the Beverly Hillbillies. So there's a little trivia. But Max Baer beat him in 1934. And in 1945, he tried to have a comeback to boxing because he had been out of it for a while. Didn't work, so he went in to wrestle. And he went 120-0, which you can compare that to Goldberg's 173-0. I'm betting that Primo Carnera wrestled 120 matches because I'm not convinced. Somebody may be able to prove me otherwise, but I don't think Goldberg even wrestled 173 matches.
No, there were those times. I remember on Nitro he would come out one week and he'd be at 73, and then the following week he would be at 80. So that they were saying he was wrestling on the the off nights, and I know WCW didn't have the kind of road schedule that WWE had, but it was real easy to just pump his number up. So I definitely don't think Goldberg went anywhere near that. And
they've admitted that that didn't happen, that they were in the back just making up numbers. But I'm not sure he did 173 matches by the time he retired. I mean, this was a guy who didn't wrestle a lot. But anyway, Primo Carnera beat Ed Strangler Lewis, very famous wrestler, among others. Eventually, he lost to Lou Thez, and so that was his title match in wrestling. And he lost to Lou Thez. That's when he had his first loss. Retired in 1962, died of liver disease in 1967. Found a wonderful article on him that said that he, 1957, Aussies packed stadium to see Primo Carnera. The White City Tennis Stadium drew its biggest crowd ever Thursday night to see Primo Carnera and King Kong in a wrestling match.
What?
Yes. So I said, well, I got to find out what the hell this is all about.
Yeah.
The match, by the way, declared a no contest when both wrestlers fell out of the ring and Carnera began punching King Kong. King Kong was Emil Saza, who was known by his ring name King Kong. He was an Indian professional wrestler born in Hungary in 1909, and he was active from 1929 until at least the 70s.
Wow.
A friendly, positive character. He was a good guy, a face, and he wrestled mostly in Japan, Singapore, Europe, New Zealand, and Australia. So he is the connection, King Kong, to this movie, Mighty Joe Young, and I found that really fascinating.
Yeah, and that match he had with Primo, the crowd was officially estimated at 20,000.
Which is a lot of people.
Yeah.
A lot of people. So this, what we've just named, is all of the people in this tug of war. They're going to go tug of war with Mighty Joe. And it's pretty funny how it happens. You know, Joe isn't really into it, so they're kind of winning. And she's like, Joe, come on, you got to pull. And eventually Joe starts pulling, and he just takes them all out. I mean, it's a piece of cake. He gets to the end. It's just Angel and Primo on there. And then finally he pulls them all in, and he starts dunking Primo up and down like he's a bag of tea.
Yeah, and then tosses him into the crowd.
It is really fantastic.
Yeah, and at points, Joe is doing this with one arm, too. He's pulling with one arm.
Joe is mighty.
Mm-hmm.
So they lock up Joe at the end of the night. We see a billboard says it's the 10th Mammoth Week. Jill's mobbed on the street. She wants to go home. She wants to take Joe home. But then we see 7 weeks later, she's still there. They've now got Joe dressed up like an organ grinder monkey. People are throwing things at him to get free champagne. It's now
idea.
Really an ugly scene.
Yeah, and it's just a bad idea all around. They give people these oversized, replica coins and say throw them at him, and whichever one he picks up, whoever's number it is will get a free bottle of champagne, and that leads to some really unruly drunk guys who are mad that I guess nobody won the free champagne, and then they start giving the cigarette girl a hard time.
Yeah, they give her a hard time. Max, this is probably when you first start to like Max. He comes over and he's like, you're going to be paying for those cigarettes. You give any more problems, I'm throwing you out, Yeah. So they're like, well, the hell with him. We're crazy drunk guys. Let's go get the ape drunk. So they go and they give the ape some booze, which I thought was one of the best scenes in the movie. Drunk Joe cracked me up.
Yeah, and he just keeps downing the bottles that they give him. At first, they're like, he doesn't know what to do with it, but then he gets the hang of it, and he can't have enough.
So Joe trashes the club. He beats the hell out of those lions. I mean, Joe really, ever since that lion bit him as he was opening that cage up, Joe doesn't like lions.
Yeah, no, and it's a really, really cool scene because you've got, live lions running around in the club at points. You've got just all manner of havoc. He tosses a piano from the bandstand at one point. I mean, the whole place is destroyed. It's funny that later on we see a sign that says closed for renovations. And I can't imagine that you could renovate that place after Joe got done with it.
So they go to court, and we're told Joe has to be destroyed, that they're going to shoot him. So they come up with a scheme where Max fakes a heart attack. They sneak Joe out in a moving truck. They go on this big chase. And this part of the movie, I'm not crazy about. I kind of feel that the end of the movie just happened and we should be wrapping up quickly, but we don't. We've got quite a bit of time left.
Yeah, and then we get to a really, really, really great sequence where they come upon an orphanage that is on fire, and the movie at that point goes from black and white to a red or orange tint.
Yeah, and this is how you would have seen it in the theaters. The DVD does this. Most of the VHS tapes didn't, but back then the theaters would get the film and they'd be told you have to put a red tint on at this point contractually to play this film. And so that was to imply the fire of this scene.
Yeah, and one thing leading up to this, I'll tell you, these cops that are chasing Joe, I'm not sure even with the court order, if they needed a court order, these guys seemed like they were bloodthirsty. They wanted to shoot this ape.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You're absolutely right. So,
I mean, I think if I was on duty, I'd be like, you know what? The ape got away. Oh, well.
Yeah. I don't need to be involved in this, but I guess, they're hunters, they want to bring them back. They're just like, it's a parallel to the other characters we saw in Africa. These cops are like the hunters here, and they want to bring back Joe.
Yeah.
So they go into this orphanage scene. I do like this scene. Jill and Greg run in to save people. There's some children that are upstairs. They find them in the closet. Then they go into the attic where there's less smoke. To get away from the smoke, they go up. And so Joe has to come up there and save them. And then there's that toddler that comes out. They're like, there's a baby up there. And we see like maybe a 2 or 3 year old.
Yeah.
And Joe looks annoyed. He's like, oh, and he climbs up the tree and goes to save the toddler. And then he has this scene where he falls down holding the toddler.
Yeah. And then actually the orphanage, he falls down on the tree that collapses. And
Right.
then the toddler's in the way of what is going to be the collapsing orphanage. And this is the point where I said, oh no, this is it for Joe. He's going to cover her. The orphanage is going to collapse on him, and it's game over.
Right.
But thankfully he survives.
Now he survives. They say no one's going to shoot him now. And I want to quickly point out the remake. They do this scene differently. It takes place at one of the piers out in California, at one of those, amusement parks, and he has to climb to the top of a big Ferris wheel, and the Ferris wheel falls down. And the difference is they don't just give you a second or two to be worried about him. They make you worry about him for like 5 minutes. They have wide pan shots. He's not breathing. His heart's not beating. She cries over top of him. I mean, they amp this up so much more. Whereas this movie, thankfully, you right away are like, oh, he survived. Thank goodness. Let's move on. And so we do. Max is moved on. They go back to Africa. Max is promoting a water show. And then they're like, we got a film to show you. And they show him a film, which I really like. It's a wonderful ending. We get to see that they're in Africa. Greg went out there with her, and Joe is out there, and they're all having a good time. I thought that's a wonderful ending.
Yes, and Jill tosses Joe a banana, and he peels it and starts eating it, and he even starts waving to the camera like the other two. And
how about Max being scared of Joe on the screen?
Yes, that shows how much of an impact Joe had on Max. I'm sure Max had Joe nightmares for the rest of his life.
Yeah. Now this movie is from the old days where the titles would be where you saw all the names, and at the end you didn't get a list of credits. Mm-hmm. So it just ends with goodbye from Joe Young. It pans up, says that in the clouds, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And I really, really enjoyed watching this again. This movie I could watch 100 times. Special effects winner for 1949, and no surprise, really beautiful special effects. Ray Harryhausen was one of the guys who worked with Willis O'Brien on this, and Ray Harryhausen is renowned for this kind of special effect for movies such as Jason and the Argonauts, Clash of the Titans, Voyage of Sinbad. Fantastic stuff.
Yeah, he had just an amazing career.
So, Craig, you got a letter from your dad.
Yes, I did.
I love this. Please read.
All right, he says, I watched Mighty Joe Young like 8 times in 1 week in 1958, maybe on the WOR Channel 9 $1 Million Movie. They ran it every night, Monday to Friday at 7:30, and 3 times each on Saturday and Sunday. Signed, Craig's dad.
I love this. I love this. Yeah. Because that was something you would do then. I mean, you didn't have a VCR, and if you liked a movie, you'd make an effort to see it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid, they showed The Hobbit, the cartoon, which I really loved. I loved that cartoon, and they showed it about once a year. You'd find out it was going to be on, you'd get the TV guide and look for it. And I remember one time we had a power outage, or at least the cable went out, one or the other, when The Hobbit was on, and I was watching it. I got about a half hour in, and that was it. And I cried my eyes out.
Oh,
and my mom promised me that they would rerun it soon, and they didn't rerun it for at least another year. And so I don't blame your dad, man. If the movie's on, you want to see it back then, you would watch it.
Yeah.
$1 million movie. I remember those days. Not exactly the same time period, obviously, but I remember when you'd have the $1 million movie on this channel, and they'd show like a marquee and and it would sometimes they'd have the midnight movie, and I love that the matinee. They really made you feel like you were watching something special. You saw this whole big opening where they'd have a camera pan inside of a theater and it'd go dark and your movie would start.
Yes. Yeah, I remember WOR, or not, the WPIX here in New York. They would do something very similar with the marquee and sort of the scroll through the theater. Love it. Just really great. Brings back some good memories.
All right. So, Craig, do you tap out to Mighty Joe Young?
Even if I was going to say I would tap, it's my dad's favorite movie. But regardless, it's really fun. I think there's a lot of action in this movie. I mean, you've got some great set design. I mean, the club itself is worth watching this movie. Joe is just a wonder to behold. It's some great effects work, and I think it's got a nice mix of everything you want. It's got a little bit of a love story. It's got some action. It's got comedy. It's got a ton of wrestlers in it. I do not tap.
Yeah, I saw this movie for the first time when I was younger. I was probably a teenager, and I was at my aunt's house, and she had the videotape, and I was like, what is this? And I had never heard of Mighty Joe Young. And so she was like, oh, it's like King Kong. Take it home and watch it. And I like it better than King Kong. And from the moment I saw it, I liked it better than King Kong. I've always loved this movie. I love the story in this. I just think it's such a perfect story, and it's a world I wish I could go to. You know, it's a time period that they cover that just is so beautiful. I'd love to arrive at that nightclub. You know, I'd like to go in and see a nightclub where they had lions behind a cage, and then beautiful Dreamer and Joe comes up out of the stage. I love everything about this movie. It plays wonderfully. I feel the end stretches a little bit more than it needs to, but it is just a great, fun, funny movie. I thought the remake was very good, and I actually would love it if they would remake this movie again. I absolutely think this is a story that doesn't get old. So no, I do not tap out to Mighty Joe Young.
Great.
Well, Craig, thank you for joining me on this one.
Thank you. This was really a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed running through all the wrestlers that we covered in this movie, because I learned a lot about some guys I'd never heard of before.
Yeah, it was really neat to dig up stuff. I mean, to find this information, you and I were looking for it, and there was a lot of these guys I thought we were never going to find anything on them, and then all of a sudden we found something, you know, and it was very exciting to dig that stuff up. Also, this is the oldest film we've reviewed so far.
Yes. It beats No Holds Barred by quite a few years.
Yeah, like 6 years. So that is pretty exciting. Well, that's it for this week, and we will see you next time with a new movie that involves wrestlers or wrestling right here on Camel Clutch Cinema.
So you want to wrestle, huh?
You're too little. We got ushers bigger than you. Leave. I gotta take a crap.
Don't you see? Your skills plus my skills in the ring. Tag team.
Highway Patrol's is John Triton.
What are you doing up there?
Staying away from you.
No more rhymes now. I mean it.
Anybody want a peanut?
What's that smell?
Down goes Jimmy King.
Oh my God, a 4-post massacre. No one can survive this. This isn't even a pay-per-view.